in the House of Representatives. One of them, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, is behind a big push to recruit.
And in Pennsylvania, Trump is leading by more than 2.5 points. Now, currently, the president has lawsuits in 3 states, Michigan, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, and he's calling for a recount in Wisconsin. Legal scholar and Fox News contributor Jonathan Turley was on with you guys earlier this morning. Here's what he had to say about that.
These recounts often result only in a few hundred votes being changed one way or the other. So we separate these questions of things that are more incremental, like you have with recounts, and things that are categorical, like we might see in Pennsylvania, that can affect groups of ballots.
Meanwhile, here in Wilmington, Steve, your question's a good one. What will we see victory? Watch.
My friends, I'm confident we'll emerge victorious. And there will be no blue states and red states when we win. Just the United States of America.
Here's a deadline for the ballot counting in Pennsylvania, November 10th, in Nevada, November 12th, and in North Carolina, in Georgia, November 13th. Although we could see Georgia results likely today, I think, because our producer for Fox News, David Lukowitz, is down there now driving to Fulton County. Now, DeKalb County finished their counting. There was only 2 counties left to do. DeKalb is done as of midnight. Then last night around midnight, they had about 17,000, and we believe certainly at some point this morning they should complete their counting. We'll see what that brings. Brian Ainsley, Steve?
Are they telling us the results, or they just said they were done? They're done.
Well, we don't know the time frame, Brian, of when they'll report it, but once they're done, there should be little to delay in reporting.
Yep.
Although I should say, actually, there is possibility that there's provisional and military ballots outstanding, but I think they've got the larger overall number.
All right. Thank you so much, Griff. We'll be watching that state. All right, let's bring in Kellyanne Conway, former counselor to the president. Good morning, Kellyanne.
Good morning.
Good morning. So they're counting all of these ballots. We have the lawsuits. What's the president's path forward?
The president's path forward is for North Carolina and Georgia to hold and be called for him. That's 31. You add Pennsylvania there, where he is way ahead, and we're patiently waiting for all the legal votes to be counted there. That's 51. Arizona is going the other way. I know you're one of the only places in the world that called it for him. Many of the other networks and anti-Trump papers haven't called it yet. So I know the campaign feels very good about at least the Maricopa results overnight, that the president hit his marks. He needed roughly about 57% of those ballots to go his way, and indeed they have. And then, of course, Nevada is still outstanding. Alaska is still outstanding, 3 votes. So that puts the president over the top. Let me also say that we spent 3 years. They spent 3 years investigating the president, impeaching the president. We can't wait 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks to get a result in our great sturdy democracy as to whom the next president will be. I mean, what is the rush all of a sudden? I think the rush is there was no blue wave, there was no early night, there was no Democratic progressive realignment. In fact, the Democratic down ballot disasters carried all the way to the state legislatures as well. The Democrats did not flip a single state legislature. And in fact, the Republicans flipped the House and Senate, for example, in a place like New Hampshire, where they have a Republican governor. So that's solid now. They did a similar thing in Montana, held on to the governorship. The governor there lost the Senate race. We held that. And of course, the Democratic governor. And now we have the legislature as well. So, you know, the 7 races that were either the 7 races that flipped that are brand new Republican pickups, as Leader McCarthy noted, as I tweeted yesterday, as others are saying, those were all carried by a woman, a minority candidate, and or a veteran. And that means the candidate recruitment the Republicans were doing, their message, that really carried them forward, and nobody was paying attention to that. Instead, all these phony national polls were shoved down our throats. Biden is up by 10, Biden's up by 12, Biden's up by 15. Do you know, when I took over as campaign manager in 2016, we did 0, let me repeat the number, 0 national polls from that point forward. They're not relevant. They tell you trends, but they don't dig into the electoral college map. Electability, I can tell you whether you can or can't win, is outdated. That's the way Republicans lost the presidential races for years. Electoral college is how you do or don't win. And that's why these state polls were so much more important. Do you know where Susan Collins won re-election?
But even the state polls, Kellyanne,
in Maine, that's right, they were wrong. But remember, a lot of them are media polls and academic polls. So we need to hold the same people to account. Not a single poll in the state of Maine showed Susan Collins ahead. She won by almost 9 points. It wasn't a squeaker.
Joni Ernst, a very similar situation. Just in case you think that Kellyanne is overstating it, we put together together. We got our VCRs out. We put them together. We got these cords, and we taped it, and we put it into a montage. Watch.
President Trump is dragging down Republican senators with him.
For parties, sometimes you're the windshield and sometimes you're the bug. And this year, it looks like Republicans are the bug.
This could be the year where Texas goes blue.
More likely, as we sit tonight, that Joe Biden wins a landslide.
If we see in those final polls the type of lead that Joe Biden has now, the polls are not going to be wrong.
Yeah, wrong. New York Post is from their editorial. No matter who wins the polls, the pundits, the press, were all wrong, wrong, wrong. Kellyanne, you did this for a living. And I always would see, you call the campaign, they go, our internals say this. But they're selling the public on something else. That's malpractice.
Now, I want to say something too. The reason that a lot of reporters will not cover internal polls of any candidates, let alone a presidential candidate, they'll say, well, you're biased. You want your candidate to win. No, you can't be biased internally because you're deploying resources. And the greatest resources we have, Donald Trump and Mike Pence, you're putting the money, you're deciding where to run the ads, you're deciding where to beef up the ground game.
Yep.
And so you don't want disingenuous polls. But here's the deal. I said to your Chris Wallace on January 29th, 2017, I was on his Fox News Sunday show. We had only been here less than 10 days. And he asked me a question about it. I said, Chris, not a single person has lost his or her job who was chronically wrong about this election in 2016. I predict it's not going to happen again after 2020. Nobody cares and nobody wants to cure this problem. If this were a real business, the C-suite would be cleaned out, the shareholders would revolt, and the consumers would vote with their feet. They'd go elsewhere. But these polls weren't scientific evidentiary measures of what was going to happen. They're wishful thinking. And here's one thing. I was a pollster for decades. And I used to give paid speeches about polls too and advise clients. One thing we all have to remember is it's becoming increasingly difficult to sample enough people in each cohort by race, by gender, by age, by geography, by party affiliation. And you have to wait, WAIT, to finish a poll over a series of days for it to be accurate. But what's happening is they're waiting, WEIGHT, their results. So they're getting a small number of responses in an individual cohort and extrapolating that. But where is the consequence? They are so chronically wrong. There were people on TV last night who predicted a blue wave, an early night, a rebuke of the Trump agenda. The Trump agenda won up and down the ballot. We're holding the Senate. We picked up in the House, the state legislatures. Pelosi's got a big problem now because the squad that doesn't do squat